Alright. So it's still pretty hot outside. Haven't really found some places that I could do good videos for this next week. We do have the Gameon expo coming up this weekend, so we should have plenty of content after that point. In the meantime, though, we need a video for this week. So this week, I kind of want to do a video of some of the things from my console fleet that I have. Today, I want to take a look at the Gameboy camera with the Gameboy printer. Mostly because our Gameboy printer here does make some kind of cool noises. So we'll take a look at both of these items and see if we can make some cool sounds come out of them. So first thing we gotta do, we gotta put batteries in these. They eat lots of batteries, 4 AA's for this one, 6 for this thing. So let's go ahead and listen to those sounds. There we go. I was worried it wasn't going to work. Alright, there's that one. Not having luck with this today. Sometimes these battery terminals get a little bit crusted up when there's corroded batteries in it. I got this one from Goodwill. Came with a whole bunch of cool accessories, but they're definitely not practical for taking it on the go. Oops, we missed the edge there. There we go. Yeah. So it works. But it's really hard for us to see that. But we can change that. We have equipment and technology. So not only do we have the Game Boy, we have the Super Game Boy and the Super Game Boy 2. The Super Game Boy was the Game Boy that we got here in the United States. This was the original one that they actually came out with. And it doesn't have a link cable. Like if you notice, your Game Boy has a link cable port on the side there for you to be able to plug the printer in, because the printer also has a link cable port. The Super Game Boy didn't support that functionality. It was really frustrating for a lot of people who like to play Pokemon and other things, because you can actually transfer these between systems and trade your Pokemon with other people. But that functionality wasn't in the original Super Game Boy. The reason for that is that this uses a different circuitry than the actual Game Boy unit itself. It does have most of the same stuff in there, but the clock speed runs approximately 2.4% faster. Because of that speed increase, the link cable port doesn't actually work, because a lot of that stuff is tied to the clock speed of the link port. So unfortunately, that means that we didn't get one that has a link port. However, in Japan, they released a revamped model called the Super Game Boy 2. The Super Game Boy 2 is a perfected version of the Super Game Boy 1, and it actually has a crystal oscillator inside of it to keep the clock speed the same as the actual real Game Boy system. I don't know if we can see it through the plastic shell. It might be on the front side. I can't see. Yeah, there it is. So like right down there, there's actually a crystal oscillator on this one that this one does not have. Because it has that crystal oscillator, it actually works at the proper speed. And because it works at the proper speed, it's got a link port on it. So in order for you to play this on your console, you actually have to modify it. Because if you notice on the North American version compared to the Japanese version, is it has these little grooves on here, and also the other part at the top up there. The Japanese one doesn't have those things on it. So I have region modified my Super Nintendo console, which is, you take North American, this is a Super NES Junior here, or yeah, Super NES Junior. Inside there, there's tabs that you can kind of just file out. It's hard to actually see it, but I can't like hold it up a little bit closer there. But there's tabs in there. All you have to do is just file them out. It's just a physical blockage. This is a SD2NES. I think they're called FX Pack nowadays, but this is one of the earlier models of it from Stone Age Gamer. It works as a flash card to actually play multiple different games. So with the Super Game Boy 2, we can actually plug this in to my unit right here. We can plop that right on top, and we can actually plug in a controller. So with the Super Game Boy 2 being released in Japan, with it also came the Super Game Boy controller. The Super Game Boy controller here is actually specifically designed for the Super Game Boy system. It's a little dusty. So with this controller, it does have specific stuff that you can actually use in the Super Game Boy. A lot of these features are still active with an original controller, but you have to do like a special button combination in order to make it happen. This system controller actually works kind of like a macro, so when you push one of these buttons when it's in Super Game Boy mode, it actually performs that button combination really fast and makes the option work. So there's some secrets with this controller as well. I believe if you hold down like the B button when you start it up, you can actually adjust the speed further, because it does have the ability to adjust the speed of the playback system. Now if we get this hooked up here, plug this in here, with our printer we can actually hook that up here too. let me adjust here. With the printer, you have to have this Gameboy link cable. So it's an officially branded one, and it has multiple different plug ends on it. This smaller one here is the newer version of it. So the Game Boy Pocket actually uses this one, which I have over there. This is the original Game Boy one. So this fat plug here actually plugs into the side of the Game Boy itself. But the newer one for the Game Boy Pocket and the printer, actually that wouldn't work in there. So we're going to plug this in here. The main plug here, the one that only has one tail on it, not the one that splits off into two, this actually needs to go into the Game Boy printer. So you're going to pop that in there. Put this over here, and then this one goes into the Super Game Boy 2. It uses the newer, smaller plug on there. So we're going to kind of orient that around. Alright, now we're ready to kind of power it up. Let me track up here so we can see. So, some of the cool stuff that the Super Game was actually capable of is it allows you to play your Game Boy games on your Super Nintendo, so you can bring it up nice and big and actually see it. But it also enhances it in ways where it has this extra border around it, as you see the Game Boy camera border. Certain games have their own special borders. If you wanted to, you can actually change the border by hitting the window button here, and you can actually adjust it. It's very customizable. Like if you really wanted to, you can paint and draw on the border itself, and you can like save your own custom one on it. But I like the Game Boy camera one. Let's keep that one. So that was one of those function buttons that's specific to the Game Boy, Super Game Boy controller. Other things you could do: mute the sound. You can change the color of the actual playback. So if you actually plug this into a Game Boy Color system, when you did that, it tried to assign colors to older Game Boy games. This allows you to turn that functionality on or off. Unfortunately, the Super Game Boy doesn't actually work with Game Boy Color games, but it does provide a similar function to it. In the Windows spot here as well, you can actually change the color palette. So if you wanted to, you could switch it to a different set. Some games have a special color palette that it actually puts in for it, and will make it much higher quality than it actually would ever appear on the Game Boy. But this is the Game Boy camera, so if we wanted to, we could actually turn this around and we can take a picture. So we gotta go to the photos area here. So I'm gonna push that. Just making sure you guys can see here. So when you want to take a picture, you have to go to the shoot function, which takes you to this menu, and you have different things you can do on this menu. Like you can check your photos, you can shoot photos. There's other items in Magic. This was earlier in the day before we had like smartphones and stuff. And it was the world's first digital handheld camera. I think it was like the smallest one at one point. Smallest handheld digital camera when it first came out. So if we go to shoot here, it activates the camera, which is really not the best quality as you'd imagine. You can kind of see me coming up on there. You do have the ability to adjust the contrast and the brightness. So let's see if we can kind of modify this a little bit and make me come into view here. Oh, a little too bright. It does have some latency, so you can kind of accidentally overshoot it. Let's see what if we go in the other direction. That's making it worse, so we're gonna go back. And we're getting a little bit more detail. I think the Game Boy only has like 9 different colors that actually can show on the screen at one time. So it's not the best when it comes to graphical fidelity, but it works. So if we kind of bend down here and maybe do a thumbs up or something like that and look at it, smile, we now have our photo. So after you do that, you want to save it, and then we can go back to actually messing around with it. So if we go to check, there's our photo. When you push A on it, you have different options that you could do. Like say if you wanted to stamp it, you can give yourself some eyes. Let's see if there's any other eyes. I forgot how to. There it is. So let's use these smaller eyes here. This kind of allows you to bring back some quality that the system actually is not capable of taking from the photo itself. That looks pretty horrible. But, you know, it is. Let's see what else we have. We got noses, we got like anime eyes, fangs, zipper, bolt, whole bunch of different functions on there. How about a bow tie? Why not? There we go, a little more formal. What else do we got? We got a crazy face, simple smile, noses, cat nose. We got Mickey Mouse ears, cars and stuff. Back in the day, this kind of was amazing that you had this ability to do this. Like here's some Pokemon, the Mario Brothers, letters, different fonts. Oh, it's even got Comic Sans. How about that? Japanese kanji, a whole bunch of different symbols. And that's what you have. But we want to keep it basic. So we'll go with that. Let's see. So now we want to save that. So we got our photo now. Now what do? We want to print this out. So you're going to turn on the Game Boy printer so it's activated. Make sure it's plugged in. I kind of moved it. And we're going to go to print it. Before we print it though, I forgot we can actually add a frame to it. Let's add a frame. So you have different frames that you can actually put on there that will print with the photo itself. Christmas theme one, basic ones. There is a special golden version of the Game Boy camera that I really want, but it was like a very limited edition, and you had to enter, like, I think you had to either buy it from Nintendo Power or win a contest from Nintendo Power. There's a very limited amount of those, and they're really hard to find and very expensive. So let's say postage stamp. So now when we print this out, it should have a postage stamp border. So we're going to go over here, we're going to go to print. It's going to confirm, and it's also showing you with the border on it. So we want to do that. The original paper would have a sticky back, and it looks pretty poor right now, but it's not bad for 30 years technology almost. Can't see if I'm actually holding it up to the camera or not. I think I am. But there you go. Depending on the game you had other games that actually utilized the Game Boy printer, like Pokemon and stuff would use it. A couple other games, I think when you beat the game, it actually gave you like a special certificate you can print off as well. So there's all sorts of cool functions when it comes to using the Game Boy printer and Game Boy camera together. That's basic overview of the Game Boy camera itself. Now I think we'll probably try to see if we can get some noises and sounds out of it. So I'm gonna mute this and we'll go in and print another photo. I don't know who this person is because I bought this from Goodwill, but hey, let's print it out. I'm gonna hold it up to the dish now. Maybe it just needed to warm up. This actually printed out better than my print. That's kind of sad. But there it is. Oops, I accidentally bumped that. Hopefully I didn't turn that. So other things you could have done with Game Boy print camera and printer is you can actually like scan your face into the game. So using the play function here, they probably are already done it. But on this, there's actually a full-fledged game here. Space Fever 2. Ah, I missed him. I'm shooting back now. Ah, burnt up right off the bat. But by default, the first couple faces are actually like the built-in ones, and then after you get to the final boss is the one that you enter in there. So like, if you shoot any of these pods here, that actually takes you to the games. This one is run, 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 and you can use your own custom face or the built-in faces. The question one is the one that you made. Simple controls on this one. Just gotta push up to jump, tap A to run, and B to flap. This is kind of hard to do, especially on the small Game Boy, and still pay attention to what's going on. But it's a little bit easier here, although there is some input latency. So let's try it. So this is the character that the guy who owned this before me actually has. Oop. Ah. I'm gonna beat the bird, but not the mole. That mole's pretty fast. I could beat him back in the day when I was a kid. I beat him. I just have to really try a little bit more here. But that's run. There also is ball. And this one you can choose your background music and your face. This is similar to the Game & Watch ball that you can actually get. It's like the small little Game & Watch. It's the predecessor to the Game Boy itself. The whole goal in this one, it's a little boring, but you just gotta keep the balls juggling. It gets faster as you go on. So left and right allows you to change your hands in. You can also use A and B. So if you needed to, you could hit that. You can tap really fast and get there pretty quick. If you drop the ball, though, this is what happens. Crush. And then it asks you if you want to play again. You just, nah. The last game is not really a game, it's more of a sound machine. So like, let's listen to the sample. We'll say sample number 2. In this you can change the tempo, you can change the sounds, there's different channels and tracks you can do. It was a very early music creation system. And there's actually a big following for this thing, where there's people actually modded and made this more advanced than it actually is. Similar to the whole Mario Paint phenomenon from the Super Nintendo. So here's like the different channels you could choose. You can see the blank channels, nothing's there, and the channels that has something, it plays a note when the little dot goes past it. Not much for this one. It's more just for entertainment purposes. We're not gonna save the beats. Well, that's DJ. In the view, this allows you to kind of play your photo album or make it a show. Not too much exciting stuff here, like where you have all your photos, it kind of just plays them out. Other things you have, like items, if you wanted a self-timer or time-lapse, say that you wanted to actually set this up and take a photo of yourself. And then magic allows you to do different trick lenses. So if you like wanted to do a split half face, another half another face, if you wanted to flip it, if you wanted to make a panoramic, it does that. And also this is where you change your game face. A lot of people don't know that there's actually a third thing that you can do here. So if you hit the select button, you actually get to this special menu which allows you to do different stuff. Like you make video edits, doodles, and special things, and also your link. So in this you can send photos to and from other Game Boy cameras if you link them together. You can also go over here to print things as well, like changing your print options. This allows you to change like the feed margin, about how many lines it gives you extra, and then you can also choose different photos. So we got 8 photos on there. So if you wanted to batch print them all together, you could. So you would select each one that you wanted to print, and then you would tell how many spaces of lines that you wanted to leave between it, and then you would hit print. And this is what that would look like. And there you go. You batch printed all 3. And you can adjust the space in between them so that way there's more or less space. So say you wanted them closer together. You might also be able to make a panoramic on it. Although I don't know if you can get rid of the frame. I think there still will be a frame always. I don't think you can turn it off. But imagine like taking the top of a photo and then the middle of a photo and then the bottom. You can kind of move them together and make it like one big long photo. There's still quite a big following for the Game Boy camera online, and there's actually people who've modded the lens and actually was able to put other kit lens type things onto it to make it pretty much a real camera. You're still limited by the colors of the Game Boy itself, but you still have the ability to do other things. But anyway, that's the Game Boy camera. I didn't really continue to talk about the different functions like the speed function for this system. That slows down the speed. So I think it goes quarter speed, half speed, and then full speed. That could be useful when you're playing certain games and you need to slow it down for like skill and stuff like that. It allows you to kind of cheat it. But that's what those buttons do. This can be used as a regular controller as well. If you switch it off of Super Game Boy functionality, then these become the alternate characters that they actually say on there. So if you see this is the R button, that's your L button, X and Y, or Y and X, similar to how an actual gamepad would look like, except your R and L buttons are on the top instead of there. People like to use this controller for like a fight pad because it's very similar to fight pads would be, and the layout that one would be. So that's the Super Game Boy, Super Game Boy 2, Game Boy Color, or not Game Boy Color, but Game Boy Printer, I meant to say. Another cool function that the Game Boy printer actually can do is it can do a test print when you first turn it on. So if you hold down the feed button on there, let me angle this down so we can actually see it. You hold down the feed button when you turn it on, it actually prints a test part. So it prints a little hello. Whoops. Apparently the battery ran out on my other thing there. Well, that's pretty much all we got here for the Game Boy and the Game Boy printer and the Game Boy Super Game Boy 2 and 1. With that, we'll be going to the Gameon Expo this week, so wish me luck in being able to collect some cool stuff for everyone here. And I'll see you guys next week.